to me, it's really about trustworthiness, not just trust.
Hi, this is Anna Kostecka. Welcome to What Works Across Cultures, my podcast on the art and science of global leadership and teamwork. I've explored this topic for over 15 years. Now, I'm bringing experts from all around the world to talk about how culture shapes the way we lead, communicate, and collaborate. And of course, what works across cultures. Join our conversation. Welcome. Our first episode is dedicated to trust because I truly believe that trust is the glue, it is the currency of collaboration in global teams and actually in any teams. Before we start, I have a small disclaimer or just something I want to tell you to make sure that we're all on the same page. We will be exploring cultural differences at this podcast, and cultural differences are those patterns, shared patterns of how we behave and how we interpret the behaviors of others. And we'll be comparing different cultures. Today, for example, Indian culture, Polish culture, maybe US culture, or even more broadly, European, North American, and Asian cultures. And we will talk about common behaviors, why people act the way they act, and how this might come across to someone from the outside. And just to be clear, this does not mean that everyone will act in the same way. People are complex. There are many factors that impact the situation. And I want to make sure that this is clear. The majority of misunderstandings that I've seen in global teams come from the fact that we take our cultural lens and we interpret the behavior of someone else from our own point of view. And so today, I invited a colleague of mine, Sudeep Chhabra, who's a leadership development expert from India, with over 26 years of experience in helping leaders excel in their roles. And why I invited Sudeep. Sudeep, you work at the intersection of leadership, learning, and change, and you spent over 2 decades now coaching, facilitating, and designing learning experiences for leaders from organizations like EY, BCG, HSBC, and American Express. What I love about your work is that you always focus on helping leaders see things clearly and take different points of view. I'm currently based in Warsaw after spending 7 years in Toronto, and you're based in New Delhi. And I thought that for the first episode, it's going to be really interesting to have those two cultures compared because I tend to work with a lot of IT professionals from Poland. Poland is one of the top outsourcing centers in the world. So is India. So a lot of Poles and a lot of Indian people collaborate globally together. Sudeep, so after this short introduction, maybe I'll start with the first question. We actually met quite randomly at a leadership conference and we were placed in a breakout rooms for like 15 minutes, right? And after that, I think I was so impressed by your insights and how you treated others in this breakout room that I reached out to you and I asked you to have a chat with me. So my question to you, my first question is, what made you say yes and what made you trust me?
Anna, thank you so much. Firstly, I want to thank you for this really generous introduction of mine. And I think more than that, I'm just super excited to be here and doing this podcast with you. Not just because of the relationship that we developed, getting to know each other and working on some projects this year, but also because of the diversity of thought and input that you brought to the table. And I learned a lot from you. So, as I think of that event, I think it was a leadership meeting and it was, as always is the case, it was super random. I think the reason that I had this almost instinctive urge to reach out to you out of the 4 or 5 other people was also because I noticed just how calm and fair you seem to be to me in that really short interaction. So I think if I was to say one word, I would say it was about openness. It was about not only my curiosity to understand someone from a completely different perspective, but also, this openness of, hold on, here is someone who is extremely fair in the way they dealt and spoke and the words they used. What could I learn out of this person, or what could I learn out of this interaction? I think that was really the hook. When before I could have sort of emailed you or found you on LinkedIn, you had done it and you had already sent me a request.
That's actually a practice that I learned in Canada, just reaching out to people that in some ways inspired you or interested you and asking them for an informational interview. In Poland, where I'm originally from, this is not very common, but I find it to be, I actually had to get used to it because it was very weird for me at the beginning to kind of reach out to random people or people that I don't know. So you talk a little bit about what made you trust me. I think what made me trust you was that we also found something that we had in common, and that we love learning. And we love looking into things from different perspectives. And I'm so excited, to be exploring this topic, huge topic of trust. And maybe let's start with some definition. So really, for me, the simplest way of thinking about trust is that you believe that someone you trust will do what is expected of them. So, for example, you will say what you will do. I know that you have my back. I know that if I tell you something in confidence, you will not share it. You will not reveal my secrets. And basically, I can be vulnerable with you. So, given your experience, when you facilitate, when you coach, how do you teach people to build trust?
No, thanks. This is a great question. I think before I answer this, I have to tell you a tidbit. As you were talking about our story, I quickly pulled out the conversation that we had so many months ago on LinkedIn, and I had a notion, right? I was like, hold on, let me just check this before I tell Anna. At that time, instead of just sending out a request, you actually sent a request with some context. So there was a message with it, not the typical vanilla connect with someone request that you sent. And I think that part is really, really important to someone like me.
What did I say?
If I look it up, I'm looking it up. You just said, this is like almost a year and a half back now. You said, hi, Sudeep. I appreciated the way you contributed to shaping our discussion in the breakout room today. Would you be open to stay connected on LinkedIn? And thank you. Mm-hmm. So the reason I want to talk about this tidbit before I answer your question is that, to me, the first point of contact with somebody new is a very clear marker of what could I expect from them. And while some people say that this is very instinctive, to me, communication is a really important aspect. Not only is something that I teach, but I'm probably more acutely aware of how people communicate. So I observe this more than, let's say, a regular person would, because I'm in the domain of coaching and helping people do that. Mm-hmm. So the reason I tell you this tidbit is because it will relate to at least one of the most universal concepts that I typically use in my trainings and my facilitation. Because it's very often that when I'm working with corporate companies, they'll want to solve for trust between small, mid, and large teams. Mm. And I think the easiest way to explain this very quickly to someone is the famous trust equation, if you may know from the book, The Trusted Advisor.
Yes, I use it too.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. And, to me, the only difference is that I named it slightly differently in the Indian context. So trust is equal to credibility plus reliability plus openness. This is, at the top of the equation. And you divide this by self-orientation. So technically, it's self-orientation is inversely proportional to trust. So, if you're oriented too much about yourself, well, that's less trust. Mm-hmm. And so these four components, I think, are really good components to think of when you think about teaching someone how to build trust, especially, in corporate environments where you have to work with different people and you may not be having very specific reporting lines or working relationships. You just meet a lot of people and work, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And maybe for the listeners, if we could just define what those words mean. So what is credibility? What is reliability? And I think you said openness. Originally, it's intimacy. I also changed this word. I changed it for connection. Yes, I changed it for connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, in the Asian context, and especially in India, intimacy can be misconstrued or could be understood in a different way. So I'm surprised you also changed that and you used connection and I use openness. So pretty much the same thing. So very simply put, credibility translates to, do you have the skills to do something that you said you could? And this is really about signaling. It's really about what is the expertise that you could demonstrate in your work? What are the sort
Mm-hmm.
of certifications or degrees or qualifications that you have, your experience that sort of indicates that you are who you claim to be? I think there's another interesting aspect of credibility, which is that if you don't know something, do you admit that you don't know something, especially if it's your professional field or it's your sector? To me,
Mm-hmm.
that's being credible. So credibility is really about, are you the kind of person I think you are? It's about signaling. Reliability, which is the second factor in my mind, is more about punctuality and like, can I really count on you? Can I expect you to be very consistent with the words that you said or your promises that you made? So, do you meet the expectations? Are you the kind of person who, if you're going to be 5 minutes late to a meeting, will call up and say, I'm sorry, I'll be late by 5 minutes? Or do
Mm-hmm.
you raise red flags in advance, for example, if a
Mm-hmm.
project is not working out as per the agreed timeline? So, to me, that's really reliability. And openness is actually two-sided in my view. On one side, it's being vulnerable and showing to the other person who you really are. But on the other side, it's also about honesty. Like, are you really honest with me? Are you the kind of person who is comfortable in receiving and giving feedback respectfully? Are you okay and comfortable with people being vulnerable around you and you being vulnerable with people?
Mm-hmm.
And are you also the kind of person who can maintain confidentiality? I think that's a big one. So many people think of openness as being communication and I can just be who I am and I can say what
Mm-hmm.
I have to say. But no, it also means, are you good at being clear? What is the kind of information that you may not want to share in a particular context? And like, I remember a really funny story I remember from my times when I was working many years back. And the feedback I used to get from the people around me was like, hey, you're fun to work with. You're a chilled out person. It's so
Mm-hmm.
nice. You're easygoing and all of that. And when I met my boss and I was in a feedback conversation, my boss told me it doesn't seem to be working out. So I had very harsh feedback. So I was like, what do you mean? What's not working out? Like, I shouldn't be friendly? I I should be closed, like I should be sour and sullen with people. Said, no, 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 no. Sometimes in this situation, you don't realize that you're talking quite a lot and you are saying some things which may be personal to some people in different forums. And so, you have to be very mindful of also how you communicate. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by confidentiality, like making sure that if your best friend has said something to you, then you keep it at that.
Mm-hmm.
So openness is not just being like 100% open and just saying whatever you want to say. And finally, the fourth one, which is at the bottom of the equation, is self orientation. And self orientation is, do you think more about yourself than the other person at that particular moment of interaction? So while you may have a point of view, can you put yourself in the other person's shoes? Are you invested in, let's say, the larger picture? Are you listening and really listening into what the other person is saying than just nodding your head and checking
Mm-hmm.
your phone, for example?
Whether you're in for the team or just for yourself, right?
Yes, it's also that. It's also like many times when you're in an organization and you're managing a team for the first time, you're very oriented to being protective of your team. So if another department comes to you and says, oh, well, this was not done, it almost seems like an allegation against your team. So you're like, no, 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 no. How can I do the wrong thing? Because I'm the good leader here or the
Mm-hmm.
good manager. And so it's not really just orientation towards yourself and how you're seeing the other party, but it could also mean orientation towards the organizational goals and towards the bigger picture and towards how the community or the team may be feeling.
Mm-hmm. So I like that we already are kind of going a little bit in the direction of cultural differences. What I like about trust equation is that it's a nice universal model, and it's kind of makes things that are kind of obvious nicely put together. But in my work with global teams, I noticed that different parts of this equation have a different importance in different cultures. And
interesting.
oftentimes, so I will actually ask you a question. I often ask this question when I facilitate workshops on building trust. So Sudeep, imagine this situation. You're about to start a new project with a team or organization that you don't know. And you have one colleague from your team that you can ask to join this first meeting. And who will you choose? Let's say that team member number 1 says something like, I worked on a project like this in the past and I improved the outputs by 35%. And team member number 2 says, I used to work very closely with this team and I know all key contacts in the client's team. So who would you choose?
So you're saying I have to choose between person 1 who's more efficient and can get the job done versus person 2 who's probably more relationship oriented and knows many people from before, right? I would lean towards person 2, to be honest. And the reason is that, in my mind at least, I feel that someone who already knows some people on the team or in that location would have an unfair advantage because they would have the context. They would have some working relationships. And to me, that's sometimes more important when you're working with a new project, which is setting the comfort level and setting the agenda, than the efficiency. I mean, efficiency is important, but I'd start with relationship.
So a few things that I'm hearing here. I think it's the second time that you mentioned the context, right? I think you mentioned it first with my kind of introduction, giving a little bit of context, right? Having a context, understanding the relationships. There's this one dimension that you can use to compare culture. It's related to communication. One cultures are kind of low context and other cultures are high context. So a lot of information is not just in what is said, but in the situation, who's in the room, in the relationship. So India is actually like one of the high context cultures. So I think that,
yes, it is.
Right? That came to my mind. And the second thing I want to say is that I ask this question often at the workshops because the answers very nicely reveal what do we use to build trust. People have very strong opinions when they answer this question. People that choose team member number 1 typically are either from the cultures that are more task-oriented or this is just their work style. So you build trust because you deliver on task. You agree on a schedule, you do it, you deliver, so you can trust others. But cultures that are more relationship-oriented, it's not only like, of course, you have to deliver on tasks, but you also, to trust someone, you actually need to know them. And that requires time. You need to spend some time getting to know them as people. It's not only that they do what they said that they will do. So this also nicely fits into this pattern. For example, India is more of a relationship-based culture compared to, for example, Poland. Although Poland is kind of in the middle. We also build trust through getting to know people.
Yeah, actually, the thing I want to add here is the reason I mentioned the LinkedIn comment that you had put down, and you related it very beautifully to context, is because in my mind, that part related to the openness aspect of the trust equation. It related to, here is a person who's open and curious like me and is providing me the context. And by context, I would link it to reliability in the trust equation, saying whatever is on their mind is what they are laying out for me on the first bit. And so I have more context and I know why they are reaching out or what was the aspect that they liked in this interaction with me in the breakout room. So very interesting to see the high context and low context definition. I had not heard that before.
So from your experience, you've worked with so many teams in India, you work with so many global teams. What do you think people get wrong when they think about building trust working with colleagues from India?
Yeah, so let me build on the observation that you had, which is that India is very relationship-based culture, or more of a relationship-based culture than a task-based culture, which is quite true, actually. And so I would say three things. And rather than say that, okay, this is what they get wrong, let me frame it in the way of what they could do differently. Right. And
Always a
so,
strength-based coach, right? Looking at the
yes,
strengths.
yes. I think in all the work that I'm doing as a strengths coach, this is one of the key things that rather than focus on pointing out what's not working, could you focus on the one small mini step you could take to make it work, right? And I think that in itself is a good signal to the other party. But yeah, so I think three things. I think the first thing is that when you're working with someone in India, it helps to spend a couple of minutes to really set the context, get to know them, do a little bit of chit chat. And I don't think this is just for India. I think this works across cultures as a good protocol or a good thing to follow. But I think in India, the impact is much higher. So, don't jump into the project without just doing a bit of a chit chat and saying, hello, how's the temperature? What's happening? What was the most fun thing that's happened? So set a bit of context. And I call this like have a cup of tea before you jump into your tasks. Like, don't just say, hi, my name is Anna, and great, we're working on this project. This is the deadline. Can you do this? And I will do that. That's not helpful. I think the second thing is that in India, people take work very seriously. And so work and life is really a very intertwined. So many people are really defined by their work. And so the distinction between your work and your personal life is much more fuzzy. And so work is really who you are and what you've achieved, because it's a society where your work is a good indicator of the kind of effort that you can put in or the kind of person you are. It's the first signal. So I always think of whenever you're going to work with someone in India, know that their home version could be different from their work version. And so make sure that when you're speaking with them or when you're interacting with them, your tonality, your words, your communication is oriented to check things first rather than assume that the task will get done. And so
What do
that's
you
the
mean?
second.
What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, let's say that you have a crazy deadline to meet and you have to talk to 5 stakeholders, and one of your stakeholders is in India. Just for the sake of the conversation, let's assume it's me, right? And here is version 1 of Anna. Anna walks into the meeting, says, hi, Sudeep. I'm talking to 5 people. I really have 15 minutes. I just want to let you know this is the time, and I need this done by 4 o'clock. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know over email. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye. This is version 1. Okay. Version 2 could be that Anna does walk in. She doesn't change her point of view or her way of working. She still says, hi, I only have 20 minutes and I need this project done. I need this by 4 p.m. But if she adds a line saying, is this okay with you? I hope this is not too much of a stretch considering we're in different time zones. I think that is such a powerful additional short thing to do, so small, easy thing to do that could completely change the equation of how this other person may trust you, because you may not know the extent of the importance of what work means for this person in India than just a task.
And I think that in this way, in the second way, I'm adding a little bit of the connection or openness, and I'm showing that I care for the other person. I'm often finding also asking open-ended questions very helpful.
Very powerful.
Right? Rather than, right, will it work? Because I think it's sometimes difficult for people to say, no, I'm sorry, it won't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's really, really important. And again, I don't want to say that this is universally true across India. I mean, I know many people who are more task-oriented than being relationship-oriented. But generally speaking, work is a very intertwined, a very, very deep part of someone's life, especially in Asian cultures. So the distinction between, okay, I'm a different person at work and I'm a different person at home is fuzzy, right? Is you do bring your work home in that sense more than you should. And maybe the third and the last thing to remember is that this concept of we over I. So if you're working with someone in India, always keep in mind that if you get a mild yes, or you get a little bit of a, I'm not sure, I'll let you know, then the person you are talking to is not just reacting and responding on only their behalf, but they could also be thinking about their teams. They could also be thinking of, okay, what's the possibility of getting something done? How many stakeholders do I have to speak to? So communication, when asked about work with one person in India, may not just be their area of influence. They could be speaking on behalf of their teams or on behalf of the community. So it's really the we over I. It's really the collective responsibility and how they will look. Like, let me try and give you an example. Oftentimes, in a formal atmosphere in a work environment, I would have heard teams saying, this is right and this is wrong. But there could be a cafeteria conversation saying, we can't be seen in India as people who are not as professional as anyone else. So, this feeling of, wait a minute, like it's we over just me and what the person was speaking to me.
So what I'm hearing, for example, is that this another dimension of culture that you can use to compare culture is some cultures are more individualistic and some are more collectivistic, right? So yes. India would be more thinking about we as a group first versus more individualistic cultures like, for example, US, Canada, Netherlands that are thinking about kind of me, what I am responsible for, what I deliver, right?
100%. I think you put the right nomenclature. See how beautifully you said it in just 2 lines versus me in 3 paragraphs.
Because we have different communication styles. Like I am more kind of, direct, I think. And what I like about your communication style is that you use a lot of stories and you give the context. So then it's clear and, someone can make their own points, which I just did, right? So I did understand your story. So this is great. I'm going to ask you a question because the way people answer what makes you trust others when I work with, for example, teams in Poland is a little bit different. One of the things that comes up quite a lot is honesty. And honesty is interpreted like, if something is wrong, just don't sugarcoat it, just tell me. And for example, we get a lot of misunderstandings when we work, for example, with colleagues from the United States, where sensitive issues sometimes are communicated more indirectly, or when we work with colleagues from India, when sometimes it's sensitive issues are not communicated directly like we would like to. And that impacts trust, right? Because we interpret it as someone is being dishonest, why they just don't tell us. What is your perspective on that? Do you find those situations where it's not okay to say straight away, okay, Anna, I'm not going to do this, or, I can't deliver what I said that I would do. Something didn't work.
Yeah, I think very nuanced question. So I'll just give you my immediate response. And this is my response in that sense that may not be representative of people in India in that sense, right? But to me, it just builds on the concept you talked about earlier, which is an individualistic society versus more a collectivist, or how do you say, community-based society. And because in India, we are a little bit like that, I feel that if, let's say, something is going wrong and someone has asked for a project update, generally speaking, you're not just say it as it is, because you still want to send the signal that your intent of getting the job done is really high. So you are someone who can be trusted actually with the task at hand, even when things are going wrong. So what I do is I always recommend, if you're working with people in India and more in Asia, start by finding some common ground and creating some sort of psychological safety rather than just point blank asking for a yes or a no. Also, what helps is if you explain the why, like, why are you asking me this? Because if it's not explained and it's not clearly articulated, it could be wrongly interpreted as an allegation that we were not worthy of the task that was given to us. So I don't want to be so-called, in inverted commas, not worthy. Of course, I can do better than whatever anyone else could do in this particular situation. So if you explain the why, if you say something like, I need to send out a report by 5 p.m. about the status, and it's just weekly update, and I just want to give expected timelines. Hence, I was asking, is this job done? Oh, okay, I understand. It has nothing to do with my reliability or my ability to do the job. Yeah, sure. We are delayed by 5 hours or 6 days or whatever. So I think that helps. I think the third, much more nuanced answer, at least that I have observed, is that communication happens mostly non-visually. This very famous Albert Mehrabian's principle of the 7-38-55 rule, which states that 7% of communication is really the words that you're speaking. 38% is really the so-called tonality of voice. And 55%, which is like a large chunk of communication, is really from your body language and your facial expressions. So I think, especially if you're talking to folks in India, the body language is a very good, very high indicator of what is it that they're really saying. And this is more accentuated than other people that I have met. And so facial expressions, hand movements, cues are really helpful if you're working with people in India to understand what else could be happening. So I don't know if this helps, but in my mind, these three things, right? One, create a little bit of common ground and comfort level when you're asking something very direct, very specific, very task-based. Number two, explain your why, even in a short, like explain the context a little bit and observe the body language. Listen to the music, not just the lyrics. Listen to what's happening. These three things are good indicators for anyone when they're working cross-culturally.
I think those are really great tips. I'm always thinking about communication, as a tool. So if you want to get the results that you want, you might want to adapt your style a little bit. And those tips are really related to this, more of a high context culture, in the sense that people will not only hear what you're saying, but also how you say it. So sometimes just a quick question people might read into it. And also this thinking more about the collective, thinking more about the relationship, making sure that the other person is at ease and knows that you're actually just asking it about the update. They're a professional and you just need the specific information. So I think that is really, really great and very good tips. I'm thinking about if I were to ask you again more generally, what is the most important thing you want the listeners of this podcast? And now, thinking about people that work in global teams, that lead global teams, what would you like them to know about trust? What would be the one thing?
Yeah, so if we were to really build on the trust equation as the most universal way of thinking about trust, right? In my experience, I think it's a very valuable framework to keep in mind if you have to build trust. One of the things that I've realized is that whenever you're going to explain a concept about trust, it may seem very easy to take a framework like the trust equation and say, okay, listen, this is what it is. Here are the 4 things. It's very simple. It's very structured, and just follow the rule book and follow this framework and it'll work. I think it's not as easy as just saying, do the next 4 steps and you will be trusted. To me, trust is really not a feeling that you get immediately when you meet a new person. It's really the actions that lead you to the feeling. So to me, it's really about trustworthiness, not just trust. So how could you be more worthy of someone's trust is a good way to think about trust, rather than expect, from your earlier point, Anna, that just because you come from a certain perspective, your perspective is the ideal perspective and everyone will trust you. So when you think of the trust equation from the lens of how could you be trustworthy, what could be the actions that you could take, then a good universal rule of thumb is think of the 4 components of the trust equation and see what could you do to increase those or help those 4 components. So for example, when you're meeting someone new for the first time, what would be a good behavior, or what could you do in advance to build credibility in advance, right? Even small things like if I'm going to send an email to you, and I say, during our last meeting, we discussed that we will do X, Y, Z. I've been able to do X and Y, and I will explain who is the person I've reached out for Z. Something as simple as that. In our forthcoming meeting, I'm going to talk about X, Y, and so on and so forth. Well, you're already sending a signal of credibility that, look, this person did do the work, did seek out the experts, did do whatever they have to do. So
or even reliability, right? Because they did what they said that they do.
Yeah, and I think this is another thing that I often bring about in my training is that credibility and reliability are like brothers and sisters. Like it feels like if I do something to build credibility, that will build reliability. And if I was to build reliability, it will build credibility in that sense, right? Whereas connection or openness are more cousin brothers to self-orientation. Like, these two are slightly separate. So most people misunderstand credibility and reliability together. So I'm going to come at 4 p.m. for the meeting, and I'm going to come at 4 p.m. Like, if I can't come, I'll let you know. That's reliability. Does that make you a more credible person? No. Credibility is really about your experience and your affiliations and what you've learned. So think of what could be your behavior, or what could be some actions you could take to gain the trust of someone. So what actions could you take to build credibility? What actions could you take to build reliability? What actions could you take to build openness or connection? And what actions could you take so that you are sending a signal of lower self-orientation? Oftentimes what I'll do, Anna, is if I'm training a team of like 20, 30 people, I'll ask them to make a checklist in 20 minutes of what could they do differently. And then we collate it and compare notes, and then we realize, wow, there are some actions anybody could take that speak to all four of these.
What comes up quite a lot when you do ask this question? What's your favorite thing?
I'll try and remember maybe 3 things. I think the first is sticking to your promise, right? And the promise doesn't have to be your promise, but framing it as if it was the promise that helped the team or helped the organization or the larger picture. It's not just about you, but what's the impact it can make. So I think that's part one. Part two is oftentimes about the how you communicated, which was instead of saying, Anna, I was expecting this from you. Okay, if I say, well, the project expectation was this, and Anna, I was looking towards you for these tasks, right? Okay, that's not very direct. I'm not saying anything to Anna, talking about the project.
Well, it's clear though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's clear. But you're solving for the unsaid, not the said. Always in trust. I'm reminded of this. Another trainer, I think many years back, told me that every time he would do program on trust or a training intervention on trust, he would define trust as follows: that it's like the air in a room. You don't see it. You just breathe it every day. And you only feel it when there is none in the room.
Yeah, that's a lovely metaphor.
So only when it doesn't exist, you are like gasping for breath, and that's when it becomes evident. So don't wait till then. What could you do to build this connection or be open? What could you do to be more oriented towards others and the task at hand?
What I was thinking about is what I actually really like about the trust equation, and what I found helpful for me in the context of global collaboration is that, well, I had this insight when I did kind of my own calculations. So you can rate yourself on credibility from 1 to 10, on reliability, on connection or openness, right? So I did my calculations, but then I've done it I do collaborate a lot with Canada and the US. So I did it for kind of those type of collaborations. And then I did it for my collaborations in Poland. And I noticed that the results were a little bit different. I think in my Polish collaborations, I was lacking a little bit on the connection part. And again, I think this comes from the fact that Poland, compared to Canada or US, is more of a relationship-based culture. Like we're kind of in the middle between, US would be on one side, Canada a little bit closer to the relationship, but still quite task-based. Poland in the middle, India on the more of a relationship side. So for me, it's really easy, and where my work style. In my work style, I focus on credibility and, reliability and thinking about the project. But sometimes I don't focus so much on the connection. I want to just jump into, okay, let's do it. So I think it's an interesting idea to look at those 4 components and think about, okay, what will work in a specific environment? Do I actually need to spend a little bit more time, invest a little bit more time in building the relationship and getting to know the person that I'm working with?
Yeah, super powerful. I think that's the power of an equation, right? A math equation. You can quantify it and compare notes. So yeah, I think it's a great technique. I've used it a couple of times myself. And actually, just to build on that, Anna, one could actually be very aware that, okay, in the morning I was having a meeting with my team. What's the trust score I would give myself? And then in the evening, when you are in a meeting with external stakeholders or you're meeting your boss, okay, Sudeep, what's the trust score you would give yourself? And then the minute you put it like that, you're able to notice how you behave differently in different contexts. And I think the awareness of that is the starting point of all learning, right? Like, oh my God, I could have tweaked the way I said something and it would have sent a much more powerful signal of trust.
Yes, and I love how you say signal of trust, because there are different ways of building trust. Or, for example, even in credibility, when I'm joining a meeting with my colleagues from US or from Canada, when this is the first meeting, we do the kind of introductions. Those are those short elevator pitches, let's say, or just those short introductions that establish our credentials, right? So this is kind of, if you were able to do it fast, everyone knows where you're coming from. This helps you establish credibility. For example, in different cultures in Poland, it's really helpful sometimes if someone else introduces you. We're not that comfortable talking about ourselves. So there are different ways, you signal that you're credible. So this is kind of another thing to have in mind. So I'm thinking about our conversation today, and really kind of what stood out to me, if I want to summarize it, is this universal framework for building trust equation. So thinking about your credibility, your reliability, your openness or connection, and making sure that you signal that you're not there just for yourself, but also for others. So that would be one thing. The second thing would be the cultural differences that you mentioned, Sudeep. So this setting a context, explaining the why, thinking more about us as a collective, even when asking about the tasks, Anna, have you done it? Versus from the perspective of the project that needed to be done, I was looking to you, Anna, to do it. So this setting the context, and definitely investing in a relationship and making sure that you know the other person. And this is actually universal. So Sudeep, because we share this one commonality that we have is that we love learning from others. And
yes.
So what is the most valuable thing that you took from this conversation? What stood out to you?
I think for me, it has always been the same thing whenever I speak with you, Anna, which is that every time I have a conversation with you, I'm able to see how you are seeing the context differently or how you are viewing things. So, this aspect of this funny tidbit you said of someone in Poland being more comfortable if someone else introduces you is very intriguing for me, because it's the reverse here, at least in my mind. Like, I would not like anyone else to introduce me because they'll just go on and on about what I have done and may not have any relationship with the task at hand. So I just say, let me do this. But I think the comfort and the space to be oneself such that you can learn something from the other person is really my takeaway from this conversation. And so the importance of building that space, the importance of building that comfort, the importance of saying, it's okay. I don't think the person meant it like this. I'll give them another chance, or I'll think about it in a different way, rather than being so fixed and quick with our impulsive reactions to how we meet and greet new people in our lives. I think that's my biggest learning over so many years.
That kind of sparks another thought in my mind. Oftentimes when I do workshops connected to intercultural competence or collaboration across differences. We work on a lot of case studies, and then we look at specific situations and we look at different interpretations from different points of view. And this is so helpful because it makes us stop and see the perspective of others. And we typically just jump to our own interpretation and we treat it as fact, even though it's just our interpretation. For me, the most powerful example of that was during a training where actually I was just observing. I was living in Austria then, and it was a training for people that work in kindergartens. And there was a group of, I think, around 20 women from different Austrian cities. And one of them brought this example of that she really has problems. That was a workshop on culture, cross-cultural collaboration. And she said that she really has a problem with Turkish moms who are always the last one to pick up their kids from the kindergarten. And she was really upset about it. And she also mentioned that these women were working at home, not at work. So it wasn't a scheduling thing. And she was really upset about it. And actually, a lot of other participants said, yeah, the same happens at my kindergarten. And it was only when one of them said, you know what? Yeah, it happens in my kindergarten as well. But you know why they do it? It's because it's the only time where the kids are in a German-speaking environment. So the mother wants the kid to stay there as long as possible. And, there's such a silence in the room because, coming from the interpretation of they're bad moms, they let their kids wait for them, to they're really good moms. They care about their kids and they provide them opportunities to learn German. So oftentimes, it doesn't change the situation, but the understanding of what lies behind it really, really helps.
Absolutely. There are always two sides to the same coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the world we live in today will benefit from creating this space of trusting one another a little bit more, right? It doesn't have to be a lot, but whoever you are, wherever you are, if you could just take a step back and say, okay, hold on a minute. Could I just create a teeny weeny amount of space for this conversation to happen? Wow, I think we're making good progress.
And that's a beautiful thought to finish the podcast. I wish everyone to pause, and actually I wish it to myself as well, to pause from time to time and think about different interpretations of situations. I hope that you enjoyed the first conversation on trust. Think about what makes you trust others. Are you more of a task-based person or more of a relationship-based person? And I wish you all the best in your global collaborations. And I invite you to the next episode that will come up in a month. That's going to be about communication. And I have a wonderful guest, this time from the US. Thank you. And thank you, Sudeep, for such a great conversation. As always, I've learned so much.
As always, yeah. Dana, thanks so much. It's always like freewheeling with you. Thanks for inviting me. And I wish you all the very best in this lovely adventure of podcasting.
Awesome. Thank you.